Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to ask our citizens to take a seat here in the semicircle, and our city officials just start to fill in. You're a citizen as well, so just fill it up here. Those of you that are watching live on Facebook, we want to get you some information. Even if you're not able to physically be here today, we have set up a mechanism that you are able to ask questions live and in living color. Kind of dating myself there. You can go to and this is for our guests as well, everybody in the room that has a smartphone, you can go to this website and ask questions and give comments in real time. So, I'm turning this way, please excuse my back, those that are in the room, but for those that are watching us on live, it's www.slido.com. The event code, when you go to the website, is hashtag X043. Can somebody, Shauna, can you post that on my Facebook page, please? And it's on the table over there too, or Shauna or June. It's on, the information's on the table. If you could put that on the page, you can go there and ask questions, and we're going to be following that. I need to sign on that myself. So, why are we here? And I had promised myself that I would not forget my notes over there, but we are here today because we need to know on two tracks or two levels. We need to know from the city what it is that they practice, or what are their policies and procedures when it comes to issues of gang, retaliatory youth violence, and in the worst case scenarios, responding to trauma, which can be inclusive of anywhere of how funding may be handled, the trauma process itself, the prevention mechanisms that go on. A large part of today is looking at trauma, but we can't look at trauma without looking at the efforts to prevent it and to intervene when it happens. So, though it is a focal point, there will be issues that may come up that may be indirectly related to that subject, or those subjects of youth and retaliatory violence. So we're here to have a dialogue, a learning experience together. There will be things that the city officials learn from us as citizens, and there will be things that you all learn from them. James, what is the goal? The goal is to establish an ongoing, community-driven culture and environment of collaboration. There is currently, to my knowledge, not an interdepartmental protocol within the city around mainly first aid sort of trauma response that all the departments, if it's not written, and if it is, we will find out today. But again, I'm saying according to my knowledge base and a lot of people that I consulted with, one of our elected officials, I wanted to let you know during the break, we sent a questionnaire to our elected officials and asked them about their efforts and their opinion of some things, and they shared some things, and they shared that there could be better systems put in place for that interdepartmental piece. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about coming back and following up. And so that's why we're here. So we're going to get to the agenda. The agenda includes, initially in the beginning, our city officials are going to introduce themselves in a manner of what happens at an incident. So there's an incident. For example, my first thinking was that the first person that's going to introduce themselves may be law enforcement. I saw someone from health and hospitals, whatever the EMTs, and it didn't dawn that, dual, they probably are the first two that maybe show up. So they're going to do that. I'm asking if you can, for those of you that use technology, to go to the website, because what I can do in real time is monitor the questions. And if there are 8 people asking the same question, that is a question we may interrupt and get a little bit of clarity to. A lot of the question and answer period, and we give feedback to the city, will happen after the break. There will be a break after they introduce themselves. More than just city departments, these are citizens, residents in the city. So there'll be a time during the break that you can talk to them, ask questions, get more clarity about what they say, begin to give feedback on a micro level, one-on-one with them. And then after the break, we're going to come back. And as a community, we're going to talk about our experiences versus what is shared in the beginning. And as much as they can come together, great. And if there are differences of experience versus what's asserted, then that's where the meat of the work is as far as the community collaborating and influencing, hopefully, this interdepartmental protocol being one of the things that are developed from the beginning of these dialogues. Just a couple of things to keep on your calendar real quick, and we'll start with the introductions. On April, the second Saturday in April, I believe it's April 14th, we're going to come back. There will be a lot of convo and work and emails and back and forth and community input and sharing, and I, will take on that responsibility and help try to coordinate that and get feedback, but I need help. If there are people in the room that want to help and volunteer and be a part, please see me. If you signed up on the sheet, just go back and put a check mark to your name or put a V to volunteer and be involved, and I will follow up with you personally. So we will come back the second Saturday in April and do a report back to the community about what it is that's being drafted or developed. And that is basically it. So at this time, did I introduce myself? Okay, all right. We're going to start now with our city officials. And if you see me on my phone, I am engaged. I'm actually trying to sign on and get on the live. All right, here we go.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Marcus Eddings. I'm a Deputy Superintendent for the Boston Police Department, and I'm the commander of the Criminal Investigation Division. I currently oversee the Human Trafficking Unit, Crimes Against Children's Unit, the Forensics Unit, which encompasses Crime Scene Response, the Crime Lab, Firearms Analysis Unit, as well as latent prints. I also oversee all the district detectives and detective supervisors, and the Fugitive Unit, as well as Homicide. So with regards to homicide, when we receive, there's a 911 call that alerts us that there may be a potential homicide or homicide has occurred. With that notification, the command staff is notified, our homicide team is notified, our crime scene response team is notified, and we all respond to that particular location where the incident occurred. Once we arrive on scene, of course, you do the initial investigative steps. You find out try to identify who the victim is. Once you identify the victim, you try to gather any witnesses that may be available. We'll do a canvass for any video surveillance that may give us insight as to what happened. And what we do is the detectives are gathering all this information. We also have support from the patrol force that is also conducting canvasses of the area for any type of evidence that may be around, such as ballistics or maybe a firearm or a knife or something along those lines. And one of the things that we do is, with part of the notification, we reach out to the trauma teams, and the trauma team for that particular area will respond, and they'll give assistance as well. Street workers come, the street workers assist us with possibly identifying the person. If we don't know who that person is, they may actually know who the person is, or what connections they may have to certain individuals. We also notify our victim witness resource officers. And those resource officers, their job is to get in touch with the families within 24 to 48 hours or immediately after a homicide occurs. And they are the liaison between the families, the homicide unit, agencies, and agencies that can support them, as well as organizational agencies that may give them assistance. They also assist with maybe meeting the family members after a homicide directly with the investigators if they need support, such as putting them in touch with the ME's office, the general AG's office for compensation to help them with burials, things of that nature. I don't want to go too long. I have two to 3 minutes, but that's a general overview of what we do. We respond, we canvass the areas, we identify who the suspects are, try to identify who the suspect is immediately. And if find any evidentiary things that may help us solve that crime.
Thank you, sir. Who would be next? Would that be, would that be, we actually didn't know.
Introduce us and then.
Sure. Well, who's morally responsible for that response?
We're gonna give the time, we're gonna go sequence.
Okay.
So, thanks, James.
Yep,
Good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Valdez-Lupi, and I'm the Executive Director at the Boston Public Health Commission, which is the health department for the city of Boston. Thanks for allowing us to be part of this discussion and this forum, and wanted to introduce members of my team at the health department who are involved in our trauma response and recovery activities. So after I say a little bit, I'll hand off to Chief Hooley, who leads Boston Emergency Medical Services. So as James was noting, along with our partners from police and BCYF, Chief Hooley is definitely one of our team members who's on the front lines when there is a homicide or other incident. We also have on my team Catherine Fine, who leads our violence prevention activities at the health department, Mark Scott, who manages our neighborhood trauma teams, and then also Roy Martin, who oversees he's the director of our SSYI programs. We also have members of our community neighborhood trauma response and recovery team, so I just wanted to call out the teams and have them raise their hands so that you can see them. From our Dorchester team, if you raise your hand, from JP.
Can you say the
Sure.
org is just saying that?
Sure, I'll let them introduce themselves,
Okay.
okay? From the Dorchester team, do you want to introduce yourselves really quickly?
Can you stand, please?
Sure. My name is Mary Kate Little. I'm a clinical social worker by training, but I co-lead the Dorchester Neighborhood Trauma Team along with some other folks on our staff.
I'm Jenny Valdez from the Jamaican Plain Neighborhood Trauma Team, and I am a family advocate for the team.
Bashir, UJP Neighborhood Trauma Team, and I'm the community outreach.
I'm Christine Tadgerillo, and I'm the Director of Behavioral Health at Whittier Street Health Center, and I lead the Whittier Street, Roxbury Trauma Team with Madison Park Development Program, the VIP team.
Good morning, my name is Abigail Forrester. I work for Madison Park Development Corporation, Director of Community Action, and lead partner with Whittier Street on the community liaison for NCT.
Thanks. And we also are joined by Charlene Luma, who leads the work of our mobile response team, and Charlene joins us from JRI Health. So, again, I think what James said is important, that we're here to share our updates and to listen and learn, and clearly there's a lot of work and room for improvement, and so that's what we're here to do this morning with all of you. I'll hand off to Chief Hooley so he can say a little bit more specifically about what EMS does in terms of trauma response.
I'm
sorry, you can't stretch it.
I can just stand right here, is that all right? Thanks, I need to block anybody out. But anyway, I think, most of you, know what emergency medical services does. But when we receive a call, a trauma, shooting, stabbing, anything like that is a priority 1P, it's a priority call. It typically has a very good response time. We dispatch at minimum 2 units to it, an advanced life support, a basic life support. There's generally a supervisor going as well. Even that's just a report of a single victim who's at the scene. We arrive, we assess, we look for any other threats, we look for numbers of victims to make sure we're not missing somebody, and then we triage, treat, and triage, evaluate, treat, and care for the patients. We then distribute the patients, and by that, when we transport to a hospital, and I know lots of times we will split patients up, and that's done for a couple of different reasons. One, Boston is blessed in that the sense that we do have 5 level 1 trauma centers here, and also Children's Hospital itself is also a trauma center for people who are under, not adult age. So we do have the ability to try to deliver people to hospitals where they're not going to be competing for care for the same surgeons, same operating rooms. So one, clinically, it makes sense to split folks up sometimes, even if they're related. And I realize sometimes that causes difficulty in the family and friends, but it's done, one, primarily for clinical reasons. Two, it's also done because sometimes it's some scenes where maybe a little bit chaotic and we don't know if there's maybe still some sort of beef still going on, and may follow on. That way, families, friends, and supporters, they hopefully are going to go to different hospitals, so people aren't necessarily crossing paths there. It also helps for the folks at the hospitals who may be delivering some early trauma support care to get them. It's a force multiplier for them as well. So all these hospitals may have resources on scene, and if not, the teams will be showing up there as well. Finally, whenever we treat a patient, we generate a record. It's electronic chart. We have to do it. As soon as our crew is complete writing a electronic chart and it hits submit, there's a program that sort of runs in the background that is looking for keywords like shoot, stab, call sign trauma, the impressions, or some of the treatments. If it senses that, it automatically generates two alerts. The alerts go out. One is called just a trauma team alert, and that goes out to a predefined list of personnel, some from the hospitals, some could be on some of the outreach teams. Those are from names that supplied us from Commission Bureau. And that goes out basically just saying there's been an event. There was a report of a 21-year-old female stabbed McBride Street, Jamaica Plain, went to the Brigham. That's basically just enough to give them a heads up that something has occurred, something has happened, go look, check with the hospital, whatever. There's another one that's has a little bit more detail. It's got a redacted copy of the patient care record attached to it that goes to Mark Scott, Catherine, the people who head up that division. And so it gives them a little bit more context, a little bit idea of what the seriousness is, because that hopefully then helps them to decide where they're going to send, or what team has to be activated. And lastly, it's not uncommon that we'll then call Mark or text Mark or Catherine to try to give them, if there is a bit more context. If we say like, hey, there was a particularly young crowd at the scene, or this happened at a bus stop when school was getting out, or this happened, we try to get more information like that. Or the victims here were elderly, and the perpetrator was elderly. Maybe it calls for maybe a little bit different things. So we try to get that information back to them as soon as we can.
So I quickly introduced our neighborhood trauma teams, and what happened, the work of this new team that we have, these 5 teams across 5 neighborhoods, actually built on work that we did before I came to the commission. We actually had a different structure where we had grants and partnerships with 8 community health centers across the city to provide recovery services. And in the summer of 2016, we held 14 listening sessions. We had over 350 residents join us to help us figure out how we can improve and build into it something that we were hearing from community residents was needed, which is a frontline community response team. And so with the feedback we came back with, we had an RFP, 5 teams were selected. So we have teams in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, East Boston, and JP, and then Charlene and her team through the mobile response unit at JRI helped build up this continuum of care from response to recovery services. There are 4 types, so who do we serve through these unit teams and Charlene's group? So there are 4 types of incidents that the teams respond to, and we had to be intentional in figuring out the kind of incidents we respond to, because we actually have resources limited resources and needed to think through different criteria, and I know we'll get into that discussion this afternoon, but the trauma team responds to all minor homicides, and the second is any stabbing or shooting of someone under the age of 18. The third is any shooting or stabbing that involves 2 or more people, and then the 4th category is any traumatic incident or event that impacts the broader community. And some examples of this are when a child dies unexpectedly, or if there's a suicide. But I wanted to remind everyone that we have a 24/7 hotline, and the team will respond to any calls that come through that hotline. And so we have information here, I think, that Catherine and the team have provided in terms of our brochures and comp cards. So I want to just remind everyone that we're here and available 24/7 to respond to any, but those are the four specific categories. And James actually helped us retool and make sure that those brochures and those cards are.
In full credit disclosure, also, Darren Howell was a part of that team, Monica Cannon was a part of that team, and so was Carlos Enriquez, and Fred Farrell consulted on that as well.
Thanks, James. And then in terms of what is the type of service that we provide through the neighborhood trauma teams, it really depends on what we receive when we get those calls to our hotlines. But just wanted to highlight a couple of the key services that the teams provide consistently. And they're required to be able to provide these different services. So the first is obvious, when someone calls and they need immediate individual or family support. The teams also provide community-based or in-home support and psychological first aid. The teams also provide coping services and healing groups. They do home visits, which is definitely new from what the teams did before. We partner with Lewis and Brown to do funeral and vigil support services to people who connect to us. And then on the recovery services side, because the home base is tied to community health center, the teams are able to connect individuals and families to short-term and longer-term behavioral health recovery services. So I'm going to hand over to Mark Scott, who leads the neighborhood trauma response teams, to talk through kind of to pick up where Chief Hooley left off in terms of how we find out and how we activate the teams.
Thank you again. My name is Mark Scott. I'm the Program Director for Trauma Response and Recovery for Boston Public Health Commission. So we get a notification from the police. We get, a little bit later we get a notification from EMS that there's been an incident. And then what we do is we package the information that we have in an email and we get it out to the appropriate neighborhood-based team. We also, at the same time, notify the Boston Trauma Response, which is part of JRI, the Justice Resource Institute. We're partnered with the hospitals, Boston Medical Center, Brigham and Women's Hospital, and as of recently, we started to build a partnership with Beth Israel. So we notify the hospitals as well. So we get that notification out, and then within 72 hours after receiving the notification, the team meets and coordinates that set of services that Monica talked about and to begin to assess what it is we need to be able to do. And at the same time, we're also working in partnership with BCYF in general, but particularly in the street workers space. A lot of times the street workers are on the scene, they're connected, they know, so they're reaching out to our network. We're communicating with the Boston Police Department in the same way. And so we take that information and we begin to respond to the family members of that person, as well as the friendly network and in the community itself. We're also very closely connected to Lewis D. Peace Institute. So in the case of a homicide, if the family chooses to be a part of the services in the community that's there, then we work with them through that whole process.
Before we go on, can I just ask one question? You say a response. Give me 30 seconds of what that response is in the immediacy when you talk about the response.
So, Monica had mentioned the hotline has been mentioned a couple of times. There are a number of brochures that we have that are here that are available. The hotline number is on the back. Anybody can call that number. If it's a scene, you're at it, there's a need for a response there. It's also available if it's something that happened 5 years ago, right? And it doesn't go away. So that's available. We respond physically to a scene only if someone requests it. We don't come with EMS, right? We don't come with the police. We respond when often it is them calling, but it could be a citizen call. And then once we're back into the neighborhood, we're working with that network of people that I mentioned to reach out to the family, to learn who the friends are, begin to reach out to them, to learn where it may have been an impact in the neighborhood. To engage with community organizations that are in the neighborhood, neighborhood associations, anybody that's involved in doing that kind of work. So those are the kind of things and then it depends on what's needed when we do a coping group setting. Right? And so that will vary depending on the need.
So I wanted to interject here because in the dialogues with people, social media interactions, comments on posts and whatnot, that was a huge point, that there's not a automatic or proactive, if I understood right, pushing out of the trauma response team once the police declare an all clear, unfortunately a body or whatever, once there's all clear, if I understand right, there's not a proactive, hey, either in the community or to the family, we understand this happened, what can we do? So did I understand that correctly?
That happens, that's at 72 hours.
Okay.
So people have to assess what can we do, what should we do, and the time frame is 72 hours. Now, we're working in a certain set of neighborhoods. So we're working in all of Jamaica Plain, all of East Boston, all of Mattapan. For Roxbury and for Dorchester, which are large neighborhoods that have a lot of incidents, to be able to push out proactively the way you described, the ability to be able to focus on, to understand a neighborhood, we created a set of catchments. And so those two teams work are most able to do that within that kind of a catchment. Again, the services can be accessed anywhere in the city, but the door knocking, and those kind of things are focused in that catchment. Now, if there is a neighborhood group in a neighborhood that's not in the catchment, we will support that group, those set of actors, whether they're organized or whether they're loosely organized, we'll support them in their ability to do that work.
All right, we're going to move on after this. I just want to be clear if I heard you say parts of certain areas, but all of East Boston. Clarity, listen. Hit the hip. Hit the thing. If it's there, you are questions, it will be asked. So this is a point of clarity. All of East Boston, but part of Dorchester, part of Jamaica Plain,
All of Jamaica.
all of Jamaica Plain, all of or part of Roxbury, all of Hyde Park, not Hyde Park. Okay. All right. What we can do is, I know Catherine will say that there's a website. We can get the information and make sure you get it. Where you hear me stop is where I've observed over the years, or year, in this case about this model, but where you hear me stop is where there have been huge umbrella points throughout the year. So I stopped there. I ask that you understand I'm stopping, but we want to move on because we want to stay to a time frame, because we want to make sure the exchange happens, and we want to make sure we get out of the city officials what we need to know. We want to respect y'all time. Y'all got to go do stuff on Saturday, so please bear with me as I'm facilitating. We can give you a little bit more.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlene Luma. I'm with the Boston Trauma Response Team at JRI. Thank you for having me today. So I just want to share a little bit about what you can expect from our team when you call the hotline and what type of services you will receive. So when you initially call the hotline, you'll get one of my 5 clinicians on the phone, and we'll ask you a couple questions. One specific one is being what type of service you're looking for. And sometimes people don't know what they're looking for. They just know that they need some assistance around trauma. Some of the requests that we usually get are around on-scene response. And on-scene response is only, and all of our services are by request. We don't show up anywhere. And we use the same model as you would in regards to any other emergency. So when you need an EMS, you call EMS, right? You call 911. They don't just show up. You generally have to request the service, and so or the fire department. So we operate in the same way. We want to make sure a couple things happen. We want to make sure that we have capacity. We want to make sure that we know that we're going to have enough bodies on scene in regards to service providers. We also want to make sure that the scene is appropriate. So sometimes we have to allow the police to do their job. But generally, when we're looking to provide trauma services, they happen weeks, months, days later. So even if we don't get you the night of, when a homicide or a community violent incident occurs, we are always accessible and available. through the hotline or through one of the clinicians directly. Some of the services that we provide, in addition to on-scene response, include, as mentioned before, funeral support, vigil support. We do individual therapy, short-term and long-term, as well as case management. And the hope is that as families and individuals are managing these traumatic events, that we can support you in getting the resources that you need, whether they are for a week or whether for their year or for years to come. We just want to make sure that you guys have access to the services. Yeah, I believe that's it as far as kind of what the services look like in regards to accessing the hotline. I have members of my team who will be here, and we are always available to provide you clinical support. And you don't just need to contact us if you have an incident that has occurred to you directly. We want to consult with you. We want to make sure that you have the right information, and we can always refer you to the right resources if we don't have them access to those directly.
I just want to make sure, can you also share a little bit about how you connect at the neighborhood level to the neighborhood trauma teams?
Absolutely. So when someone calls the hotline, again, we'll triage and assess kind of what the needs are. And one of the questions we'll ask you is whether or not you're connected to your local neighborhood health center. And if not, we can get you connected. And what's great about these centers is that they're wanting to support you. So we tend to be able to kind of get people in immediately, whether it's Whittier or Bowdoin or Mattapan or East Boston. We can kind of determine, based on what the information you're giving us, which health center may be the most appropriate, and we'll make sure you get connected to those health centers right away.
Excuse me for 1 second. I want to, again, these are one of those umbrella huge issues. One thing that comes up is the trauma response, and then for people after the coping groups, the presumption would be that a clinician is running the coping group, and if he or she identifies that there's a need for therapy, is there a process in place where there's a referral made? And then one of the things that keeps coming up, even from the switch of the healthcare model to this model, was issues around insurance. And people that will embrace, because let's keep it real, we need to do better as our community around embracing that it's good to go lay on somebody's black couch and have a 45-minute conversation. That's a good thing. But when people are willing to do it, if they face barriers around insurance, it becomes a limitation. So if you could speak to about 30 seconds, we're trying to stick to time. After you, if you could pass it to Will, and he's going to talk about a model that's a part of this.
So, two things. One thing is that we expect that about 20% of people who've experienced a traumatic event will need ongoing support. So when we do those coping groups, we are looking for that 20% per se. And if we've identified either through our observations or the observations of the person who actually made the referral request for the group, we'll make sure to follow up with them so that we can connect to longer-term service. Secondly, within the teams, there are opportunities to receive services. For instance, with our JRI team, we're primarily funded through MOVA, which allows us to provide services for free. So anybody that comes to receive services through our team at JRI, there's no insurance that's needed in order to provide the services. Additionally, we work with the teams to make sure that if there is a need for insurance, that health centers can support them in accessing those services. Because we want to make sure you're not only managing some of the emotional stresses related to trauma, but there are some physical impacts that can occur following traumatic events. So we want to make sure that you have access to a continuum of care, and the health centers are a great place to do that.
Consuela, can you put one thing on the parking lot for the second part is around the health services and therapy around cultural competency, please?
I'm Will Morales. I am the Commissioner of Boston Centers of Youth and Families. I have the responsibility of trying to network 29 community centers that 17 of them have pools, and at the same time we have one beach facility that's underneath our hospice. Underneath my umbrella, I have the Street Worker Program, which is a program that's aimed at actually building relationships with kids who might be sort of disengaged. I mean, they're not connected to any one organization. They might just be kids who are hanging out in the corners. It may be kids also that have been either identified as sport involved or might be active sort of in gang activity. When it comes to where we fall sort of in this scope of work, is that normally immediately when an incident happens, we're part of one of the three triangles, right? The police, the EMS, and then there's us. And the reason that sometimes there's us is because sometimes our street workers have relationships with individuals, in the community who sometimes may inform us of a shooting that happened, maybe down the street. Knowing that in each of our neighborhoods, we have street workers who are actually working with groups and individuals, who might be engaged in that kind of activity. And so sometimes we're out there to be kind of the very first individuals that you may see at a scene. Now, let's get this really clear, right? A lot of my street workers are just trauma-informed trained, okay? They are not trauma clinicians. There's a difference in the scope of work, and sometimes individuals assume that they're trauma clinicians. They're not. What they're doing when they actually show up in the scene, and it was mentioned earlier that they may help identify who the individual is the individual who might have been shot, right? Because we might know who that might be, because at the same time, some of our street workers have great relationships. Sometimes they're getting a text message about saying that they heard so-and-so might be the person who was shot at the scene. That helps the police in turn, right, make the sort of the linkages, and at the same time, hopefully begin the process on how someone communicates with the family about where that individual may be heading, what hospital they may be going, and etc. While we're there at the scene, we're constantly sort of assessing where individuals are in the traumatic experience, right? Because at the same time that they're there, they're trying to provide comfort, not only to the family who might show up at the scene, but also the different circles that surround the individual. Friends, might be people from their church or whatever it may be, and trying to hopefully assess as much as they can to see who they may see visibly having the most traumatic response to the whole shooting, with the hopes that when we are also communicating with JRI or communicating with the trauma response team, we're providing them with enough information about who they may be specifically looking at seeing, communicating with, reaching out to first because of what we observed while we were there. Sort of in the aftermath that comes after, we also provide whatever we can in visual support. We're definitely, I know that it's especially visible in the weeks that follow, especially when friends create the makeshift memorial spots. We're there to make sure that we can continue to observe those young people. And most likely what tends to happen too a lot is that, we're there to hopefully help young people also not skip the grieving process. Too many times they skip the grieving process and they're thinking about retaliation. And we know that already an act of violence has claimed one young person. And so we're going to do what we can within our powers, within our relationships, to make sure that it doesn't create a trickle effect and that things don't happen throughout the rest of the week. Individuals who have worked with street workers know that we've been very visible in a lot of the funerals. There have been times that I get calls from street workers saying, hey, the family has trouble with transportation. We make vans available. If there's issues about needing spaces for passing receptions and so forth, and our spaces can lend themselves to that, we will make that available. But then we look at the sort of the long term, right? Because what happens is that, we also work with surviving siblings as well to try to connect them to other resources to make sure that that impact of violence doesn't create sort of a continuing circle of violence within their own lives. And at the same time, we also have street workers that actually work at the hospital who are there to basically assess the situation as they come in, communicating with families and with friends, at the same time communicating with the rest of the street workers about what they're learning, what they're seeing, so that this way we can deploy our street workers in the right neighborhoods, to talk to the right people, to make sure that the continuing of violence is hopefully hindered or, or be able to be sort of the block that stops the young people from thinking about doing what they're going to do next. And so that sort of has been our role. But at the long term, we still, at the same time, continue to work with those groups a year after, maybe 2 years after the traumatic experience. Because the one thing that we also continue to observe and respect and try to acknowledge and try to make sure that we show support is especially around the anniversaries of certain individuals' deaths, individual actions, and so forth, to make sure that they know that the community and the city itself is still there, looking at that visually and making sure that we can try to provide as much support as we can.
Okay. Can we table one thing? Can you do me a favor? One of the things that has come up when you talk about your street workers, they deal with a lot. I've experienced them calling me breaking down because of so many multiplicity of scenes. Can you talk about at least for now, the clinical psychologist that will be in place for them? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
We've been able to hopefully secure some additional funding to hopefully provide some of the clinical support. I mean, one of the things about being a trauma responder, sort of working in the street work field, is that sometimes people assume that we have S in our name, S is in our chest. You know what I mean? We're just like anyone else. You know, we get impacted by the violence, and so it made it really clear to kind of think about how do we bring on board a clinical support person, you know, social worker, someone who specializes in trauma to kind of help them talk about it to themselves. Because if they're not healthy, then we can't be healthy for the young people and the families that we're supposed to support. And that right now is sort of, it's being framed out and being structured. Thank you.
So I want to put something, and I just lost it. I'm 46 years old, y'all. I'm getting older. We're going to turn it over. We're going to turn it over to the next person, and he'll introduce himself and talk. I don't know which vein, which you're speaking from. Your direct, and then there's another.
Hopefully you get it from my comments.
Okay. So he'll introduce himself, and then is that Dan? Okay, and then we're going to take a break, and you all can actually come and get some water and some snacks. June, I'm going to put you on the spot. Manny, can you show June where the snacks are and set them up out front there? We're going to take a break in just a few minutes, but Roy.
Thank you. I'll be really brief. My name is Roy Martin. My place of residence is about 3 street lights up. I've lived here my whole life. I'm a child of Boston. I'm a grandson in Boston. I'm a grandfather in Boston. And I will probably be buried in Boston. So I'm going to be here all my life. And there were a few people that walked in the room that I think we need to recognize that help us with this work as well. Thaddeus Miles is over here. He's been helpful with the work. I seen Kara Hayes walk in the room. Jeff Brown, obviously. Jeff has been big brother to a lot of us. And then Donald Osgood, who I kind of want to back into my comments by speaking about some of the work that I do in collaboration with the shops like Viop. So again, my name is Roy Martin. I work with every year about 300 or so individuals who are likely to be the individuals driving the violence. Most folks who drive the violence were previous victims as well. So in terms of trauma support, at the Boston Public Health Commission, it's a big deal for us to get to the root of some of these issues in order to make sure downstream we don't see some of these violent issues. And I think collectively, we've been doing a pretty good job. This is the city of Boston. It's not Philadelphia. We don't have a Philly problem. We don't have a Baltimore problem. We don't have a Chicago problem. But I think it's appropriate that we continue to have these meetings so that that does not happen. So we have had years, and I'm in a room with some folks, and we've all had issues participating and being victims of violence in our lifetimes in the city. So I think we have an idea, and we're all invested in this. So what I do, I work for the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative, and again, it's the 200 to 300 or so folks that already have gun cases, that have already been shot and are being served over at Viop, and are considered to be the most likely next persons to participate in an act of violence. So it makes sense that anyone who is apprehended by BPD with a gun is likely to use the gun. Anyone who was shot, or you're in a car with someone who was shot, I grew up doing this. I'm from Bromley Heath, born and raised. I might be the most likely person to retaliate on behalf of my friend. So we identify the most likely people to be violent based off that criteria, and we provide direct service to them. Now, ultimately, those individuals, if that identification is correct, they're also likely to be killed. And so we work within the system as well as wounded. We also need to keep in mind the wounded guys are sometimes a bigger problem to us than the killed guys. Now I understand as families, but some of us, and I'll use myself for example, we've seen a progression until there's an eventual homicide. And so we all need to be very thoughtful about the components that participate in this broader strategy. And so for us, we try to get right to the guys that are likely to be the persons. And in the last 5 years, I would say the sky hasn't fallen. I would also say that crime has almost been at miracle levels. And so we definitely need to stay on top of the ball. I don't know if there's any family in the room that's disappointed with my service, my staff service. I've come in rooms like this and offered my resignation to the room, to the community. If the community thinks I'm doing a bad job, this is the panel to tell it to. And I would gladly say, I submit my resignation. Now, thankfully, that hasn't happened. I don't want to quit. I don't want this to be my last day. But if I'm doing a disservice to the community, I certainly do that. So at the end of the day, I want to thank James for putting this on and the community for coming out. And if there are ways that we can improve on what we do, we certainly do it. I'm looking right at Darren Howell now. And it was talked about with Darren, James, Monica, Frank in the room as well, came to the city and said, there's an area that you can improve on. And the city took that, built a product, and improved on it. In fact, some of these issues about the trauma teams' mere existence is as a result of a community recommendation. So hopefully, anytime we have conversations like this, we leave with something. And I'm saying we, because I live here. We leave with something. So hopefully we can build on some of those prior successes, some of those prior suggestions that created these new initiatives and just continue to build. So hopefully let's have a productive conversation and let's just keep building and let's try collectively to do the best we can to keep these numbers down and we don't become, 89, 90 again in the city of Boston. Thank you.
Excuse me 1 second, because what are you going to call?
I have a process question.
Process question, yes, ma'am.
So just because I've been sort of mapping the process as you all have been doing introductions. Yeah. So in terms of SSY, I'm not as familiar. How do you get activated in these processes, or you kind of work that is always happening over here and sometimes interconnect with what happens after that?
The latter more than the prior. So what ends up happening is there's always collective meetings, strategy, responses where we all obligated and told we're not asked to be in the same room and figure out how do we mitigate the situation, how do we get to the family. Now, because I'm likely to work with somebody who's likely to be a victim, so I'll be involved with the conversation. And there are times I've been doing this, I've been at the Public Health Commission since 2003, working in this demographic field. And so the likelihood, and I've lived here my whole life, the likelihood that I may know the family impacted, and if I'm the best person to show up at the door and, try to triage that family into whatever services, I always volunteer myself. And, at the end of the day, we all need to realize, I'm from the community, so I would guess folks would agree that there are times folks come knocking on your door and you're not with it. You're like, get away from me, right? So there are times I go reach out to young persons and they tell me kick rocks. You know what I mean? So there should be a wide range of individuals, like who's the best person? You know what I mean? So if I'm already working with the person, I may be the best person. I'm looking at Bourne in the back. Bourne might be the best person. We don't know who's the best person. And in the absence of any person, you're definitely getting a response from someone like Mark, Scott, or Charlene. But that's the issue. So we don't know who's the best person to do the outreach, and because I work with the likely violent population, then, I
so
have...
sometimes informally or formally, you are connected
Correct.
or linked to the, okay.
Correct.
I was just
Thank you.
figuring out where to fit in the map. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Roy.
Thank you.
So listen, y'all know me, I'm transparent, open. Sometimes, I've known Roy for 30 years. Roy used to break dance on my floor back in Bromley Heath housing projects. And sometimes...
More than 30 years ago, bro. I wasn't breaking 30 years.
You don't want to tell me.
I'm old. I'm almost 50.
So, I bring this and I make this point because with these young people, we cannot be hypocrites and go out and say, y'all need to kumbaya and get along, and we don't. Me and Roy fell out. And I'll be very honest and transparent when he said, I appreciate James for putting this together. that means a lot, because if you know, y'all, this is Roy Martin, but if you know Roy, you know, it's, I appreciate you, man. I love you. We need to start exemplifying what it is that we want our young people to do. So for time's sake, thank you all that have spoke so far. Thaddeus Miles brought up a good point. Even though you all may not have a role necessarily, at least introduce and say who you are. And so we'll start with my longtime friend here, who you are in your role, and then you're also representing someone. You can say it, but Chief Martinez, the new Health and Human Services Chief, even before he got hired, had something planned, so he's not able to be here in his representation from his own.
Thanks,
We're going to go on break in just about 2-3 minutes, and then we're coming back, and we're going to get into the deep dialogue from the community.
All right, so I'll do this short and dirty intro. I'm Martha Rivera. I'm the Chief of Staff to Chief Martinez, and as James said, Chief and I actually both just started in our roles in the city 5 weeks ago, and so I'm here on his behalf, new to the role, but not new to the work or the community. Like James and Roy and many of us here, born and raised in Roxbury, Mission May to be exact. And so again, the issue and the work is not new to me, but the role is, and here to listen on behalf of the chief and as a resident. Thank you.
We're a little bit out of our chord.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Harris. I'm the superintendent with the Boston Police Department. I am the night commander. That means I'm pretty much in charge of the city from about 5 p.m. to sometime in the wee early mornings when the commissioner or the chief isn't available. Pretty much my job is, when I show up on the scene, is to make sure that Deputy Edens, people have all the resources they need, and to also make sure that while we're getting people at that particular scene, that the rest of the city is also covered, because we have concerns. You know, we might be at one scene, but we have concerns somewhere else too. So I have to make sure that everything is coordinated at that point, just back up Deputy Edens, people at the homicide scene. I just want to say real quickly that piggyback on what's been said earlier, but you know, we team back later on. The department meets regularly during the week to figure out where we should be putting our resources. You know, we have an incident at a particular place. You know, we will make sure that we have you know, officers there try to keep the retaliation incidents from happening. Obviously, we're not always successful, but you know, that's part of the efforts that we do, as well as trying to maintain, you know, the scenes at the time. So.
Good morning. My name is Nora Baston. I'm a deputy superintendent for the Boston Police, and I oversee the Community Support Division. And it has various components, but one of the areas that's important in this issue is that we oversee the Neighborhood Crime Watch Unit. And usually after all these incidents are over, we listen to what the community wants, and kind of like having a meeting like this, and we try to coordinate with the districts on how to you know, meet what everyone needs and bring that information to the commissioner or to the chief or to Dan Mulhern and city people, and just really be out there and engage and support you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm thankful for being invited. I work for the Boston Public Schools, and I'm the crisis liaison for the school department. And we work to try to help. We have 55,000 students in 125 schools, and our behavioral health department is part of their job is to work with the schools after a crisis, either a district-wide crisis or individual crises in schools, and help students sort of process and get back on track, because schools are a great place to be able to provide mental health services and support, especially from the people, the teachers and guidance and psychologists that are there. And so we work with the Boston Police, we work with Public Health, JRI, we work with all the agencies that have been identified, and we're grateful to be part of that organization. We are currently working, trying to give some groundwork so that when crises do happen, people are prepared and have more tools to deal with that. So out of the 125 schools, we have 70 schools right now that we're working with what we call social emotional curriculum for all students in the school, and it teaches things like connectedness, being polite, you know, what you need to be successful, and it also connects teachers and staff, because as we know, I'm a licensed social worker, relationships are the things that heal people when they go through these crises. And by developing and building stronger relationships between students and staff and any support people there, this helps weather the enduring the crises that they experience.
We have one more quick introduction, and we're going to get you guys to be able to go to break, and because I know you stretch and get up.
Good morning. My name is Tom Sexton. I'm a sergeant detective with the Boston Police Department. I defer to Superintendent Harris here because of his rank, but I'm here as the commander of the Boston Police School Unit. There's 18 of us that comprise the unit. We work extensively with John McDonald here. When there is an incident in the schools, where there's 18 of us, a couple of detectives and patrolmen, very diverse unit, and I work very closely with any incidents of violence that produce some form of trauma. We work closely with John to make sure he has the right information so that the families that may need some support in the schools and siblings of those that may be victims of trauma are receiving that support.
Could I just say one thing
10
too?
seconds.
Give a shout out to people. We have Larry Ellison here from Mammaleo Mass Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. Just want to make sure he was and a school police detective. Sorry.
I would be remiss this was the person that, so just a little context, had the opportunity to meet with Chief Martinez and Commissioner Dalupe? I say Monica. Monica, Commissioner Monica, and it simply dawned on me. I had the ability to sit there and talk and dialogue with them, and I'm like, this needs to happen on a broader scale. And I had texted the mayor, I think it was in the meeting, and said, I need one point person that's going to coordinate, because there's a lot of departments up here, and to try to get this happening. So Dan Milhern, he coordinated that, so I did want to thank him. Dan and I have a very organic, wonderful relationship, but if you could take a couple of seconds and introduce yourself, and then we'll talk later about what we mentioned outside.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Mulhern. I'm the Director of Public Safety for Mayor Walsh. And on behalf of Mayor Walsh, all of us are present because we fully recognize the significance of why we're here. I'm looking at Mary for a second. I think one of the first meetings that the mayor may have had, I'm not sure if Mary was there, but when he came into office was with a group of survivors of homicide. And I think it may have happened 24 hours into him being sworn in. I want to make clear, and Roy was never suggesting this in any way, shape, or form, but there is no level of violence that's acceptable in our neighborhoods. There's no level that's acceptable for the mayor, for our police commissioner. Our collective goal, I've known Roy for a long time, I've known James for a long time, and many people in the room. Our collective goal is to get to zero. That's our level of acceptable violence in the city of Boston. There's a lot of people that have been through some tragic events in this room, and for that I am eternally sorry. And on behalf of the mayor, we're just very, very happy to be here. Conan Harris is my deputy. I'm looking over at Kevin Sibley. Kevin, if you could just put your arm up. Kevin is director of our newly formed Officer Returning Citizens, first-time officer in the city of Boston. So we're just very anxious to learn and hear from everyone in the room, and thanks for having us.
So you all can get ready to get up and stretch. There are some, Catherine, did you introduce? Catherine and I have a similar type of relationship. Me and Dan.
My name is Catherine Fine. I'm the Director of the Division of Violence Prevention for the Boston Public Health Commission, and work with Roy and Mark and Charlie and the teams as well.
So we're going to take a break. Please, dialogue on a micro level, individually, and then we're going to come back and talk about what the city officials shared as practice. It is very, it sounds like there's a different protocol in place. We want to do a deeper dive in some things and try to make some connections. So please feel free to go grab some water. There are healthy snacks. Somebody said something about food. It's not food, it's snacks. Granola bars, pretzels, chips, peanuts, water, and there might be some juice. Thank you all. I don't know if anyone has to leave, but if not, please, everybody just